So listen, without any further ado, I wanted to introduce a man, I can't tell you how much I admire him. You know, I first started doing a show, I do a show, Freedom in Radio. I first started doing it in my car because I had a long commute. I worked as a software executive and I had a long commute and I got tired of listening to audiobooks, so I started talking about thoughts I'd had for many years and ended up publishing it and so on. And then there sort of came a tipping point where I said, you know, this is really becoming much more fun than my day job. And so I talked about it with my wife, and I then eventually quit and ended up relying on donations because there's nothing more noble than begging for a living. Hey, Socrates started it, and I might as well continue the trend. And I felt, you know, this was a courageous thing to do. I was like, yeah, being courageous. And then I heard of it, then met Adam Kokesh. Now, of course, for those of you who don't know, Adam is an ex-Marine, and so when I look at my journey and the things that I sort of had to, quote, sacrifice in order to become a messenger of reason, truth, freedom, evidence, reality, whatever you want to call it, I was very much humbled by the amount of integrity, courage, and sacrifice to go from being a Marine to being an incredibly passionate anti-war activist, an incredibly motivating speaker, an incredibly powerful community organizer. I know the word got a little bit abused recently, but it is a very powerful and noble thing to be doing. And when you see the energy and passion that this man brings to the cause, it truly is, you know, much like his biceps, it is a force of nature. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Adam Kokesh!
Thank you all very much for being here, and thanks to the organizers for putting this on. We have some late-breaking news out of Washington, D.C. tonight from the Conservative Political Action Conference. You might have heard of their famous straw poll that is supposedly heralded as the measurement of who the conservative movement is supporting for president. And since Ron Paul won it the last 2 years in a row, it's been declared by many people irrelevant. But with Mitt Romney winning it today, it is now officially irrelevant. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity today, but I have to tell you, I have some thoughts I'd like to share that aren't what I normally talk about, that are really behind what I've been thinking, things that I haven't shared except maybe in private conversations. And I'm a little bit anxious to, for the first time, subject these ideas that I hold very dear to me, that are very essential to my worldview, to the scrutiny of the public and to all of you. And so I'm very grateful to have an audience here for this that I know is embracing this message and is here because they're passionate about what I'm passionate about. And it's so exciting to see that nationally, to look around, we have a movement. We have a freedom movement like never before in human history. We've seen political movements in different countries. We've seen political forces come together and do great things and overturn governments and advance humanity. But never before in human history have we had a freedom movement like we have today in America. A movement of people who get this message at a philosophical level, at a moral level, at a spiritual level. And so I want to communicate to you today what that means to me and why I define the freedom movement so inclusively as anybody that wants to see freedom increase in this country or in this world or for humanity. And before I do, I want to take a second to ask, who are we as a movement? And a lot of times we look around and we see this beautiful community of such a diverse group of people, of so many different backgrounds, of different perspectives on liberty, of different professional backgrounds, of all the different demographics I could list, race, ethnicity, religion, yada, yada, yada. But it's people that are brought to this message. And there is one thing that I have noticed that is a universal theme that brings people together, that brings people to the message of freedom. And I think it's something that we try to overlook as we try to appeal to the mainstream, and we try to sell this message to the public, and we try to sell it in the political context, we often forget who we are. Because the first people that are going to be attracted to the message of liberty, the first that are going to challenge the establishment, that are going to stand against the government, that are going to stand against the status quo, are not the ones that the status quo treats very well. It's not going to be the valedictorians and the prom kings and queens. No, it's going to be the misfits. It's going to be the punks. It's going to be the people that have been victimized by the system. It's going to be the people that have gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to government. It's not to say that we're all such misfits. It's not to say that we're all such punks. It's not to say that everybody in our movement has to have experienced it firsthand to have come to the message, to be motivated to consider liberty as an alternative to statism. Some of us, some of you, not me, some of you are smart enough to learn from the mistakes of others. Some of you are smart enough to see the pain and suffering that others experience at the hands of government and want to do something about it. But it's not the people that the status quo treats really well that are going to be the first to question government. And it's an exciting time to be alive. It is such an exciting time to be alive historically. I like to, begging permission from the Chinese, borrow an old saying of theirs, which is appropriate since they're probably going to own this country soon enough. May you be blessed to live in interesting times. And it seems that humanity is on the verge of so many great things. So many incredible historical trends are converging right now. I mean, just look at life expectancy, look at technology, look at what we're capable of. And I'm going to come back to that. But I want to say that it's easy to be scared. It's easy to look around when you believe in liberty and you understand that the government is what it is. When you understand the scam, the immorality of statism, it's easy to look at the NDAA, the military detention provision, section 1021, and go, oh my gosh, now they can legally black bag anybody in the middle of the night and make us disappear. Before they had to do it without saying anything and, break their own rules to do it, sort of, maybe. It's easy to look at the wars and say, oh my gosh, look at this unnecessary human suffering. It's easy to look at the drug war and say, holy crap, how did we get to the point where we have 2 million Americans in jail for victimless crimes? But I look at the youth today. I just turned 30. You're not supposed to trust anyone over 30. But I consider myself at the cusp of the millennial generation, the older edge. And anytime you're at the older edge of a generation, you always identify with the younger generation. So I'm a millennial, just for the record. But the millennials, those of us who grew up with the internet, those of us who had it hardwired, who, and for people as old as I am, literally grew up with it, had it develop over our lifetimes. We watched our parents' generation call it a revolution when the internet changed the way that we communicate, that we shop, that we handle logistics, that we do research. Oh my gosh, it's a revolution. That was just the start. That was just scratching the surface. And the kids today who had smartphones in high school, the revolution that is happening with them, the paradigm shift, the philosophical revolution is something else entirely. And the power of the internet is so incredible that for those of us who now have this truth button in our pockets right here, one click away, you can lie to us, but you can't get away with it for very long. And that's a really exciting dynamic that we see in people growing up in America today. The bullshit detectors get better and better with every generation. But at the same time, an American being born today is born into what, 40-something thousand dollars worth of debt? It's not my debt. I didn't vote for that. I didn't want to pay for that. What do you think the kids are when I say that they're the misfits, they're the victims of statism, they go, wow, we should question this? Guess what? Every child born into $40,000 worth of debt has a damn good reason to start questioning government. And now they have the tools like never before. So I don't want to seem like I'm suggesting some kind of generation gap or creating some kind of divide between the millennials and the older generations. And now we the millennials have a generation that's even coming up behind us that's going to have a greater advantage than we do in fighting this paradigm of statism. But there's a philosophy gap. There's an awareness gap. And it favors youth, but it's not exclusive to the youth. And we see that a lot of people who didn't grow up with the internet are able to embrace it. are able to see this and are able to come along on this next phase of human social development and ways of sharing information and communicating. And I'm grateful for the fact that there are people like Stefan Molyneux and Caleb Leverett and so many others here today who are able to see this and be a part of this new paradigm. So, to get to the ideas that I'm actually a little bit anxious about sharing tonight, I want to get back in time about 2 million years to humanity's state of nature. Who was in charge? When we first became Homo sapiens, and for all the diversity of the freedom movement, I think everybody here qualifies, right? I know my dog sometimes likes to think that he's a member of the freedom movement, but I'm pretty sure we're all Homo sapiens. And at the dawn of the species, let's just say freedom wasn't exactly a priority. It was survival and reproduction. And life was nasty and brutish and short. But the focus is still survival and reproduction, whether you want to deny it or not. And within our little tribal units, whoever could pick up the biggest rock was in charge. And before language, before critical thinking, before philosophy, this was actually a good thing. And if you weren't the alpha male of your little tribal unit, your odds of survival actually increased by submitting to the alpha male. By not challenging the idea that human relationships could be defined by whoever could use the most force against the other. And by the way, this wasn't a great situation for women, but we've obviously come a long way since then. Sadly, you can still see, however, the social dynamic that existed then is alive and well today, and that for a lot of people, they are better off by submitting to the status quo. A lot of people are better off taking that government job. A lot of people are better off not questioning authority. A lot of people are able to put food on the table for their families because they're part of the system. But we're changing that. And because we are pack animals who once hunted in packs, our so-called evolutionary brain explosion allowed us to communicate and coordinate. And suddenly the guy that could pick up the biggest rock wasn't necessarily in charge. It was now the best hunter, the guy who could lead effectively in a coordinated effort that required communication and cooperation. That was the real point, I believe, at which we became truly, distinctly human. And from thenceforth, we have been evolving further and further from that state of nature to be more human and less animal. Not that we'll ever not be animals, but to have the gift of reason and logic that no other creatures on earth enjoy, at least to the extent that we do, is one that we are really only starting to realize the potential of 2 million years later. So we've gone from whoever could pick up the biggest rock was in charge to tribalism, to communism, to socialism, to capitalism with slavery, to capitalism with wage slavery, and so on and so forth. And I see this from the long view very optimistically, because I think that this progress towards a state of a free society is inevitable. To me, freedom is simply a byproduct of our ability to apply logic and reason and see that there is a better way than dealing with each other by force and fraud and coercion. This is our destiny as a species. Now, the ideal state of liberty is arguably not actually possible. You could have what you might envision as a free society, but the moment that someone gets punched in the face, it's not a free society anymore, at least for that person. The right to self-ownership, as it is so essential to freedom, is then violated. But that ideal that we can strive towards is something that I think more and more people are embracing. And it's a process of 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards here. I'm not some idealist to say that this is obvious and this is happening, and I'm not trying to deny the current reality that so many people are very legitimately afraid of when they see what government has become, this monstrosity, this leech on the rest of us. But really, we could see it as a process of 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards that happens simultaneously on many different threads. And you could see the start of a major step backwards in 1913 with the founding of the Federal Reserve. And you could see, if you really understand, and I know not everybody is an expert on monetary policy. You don't have to be an advocate of freedom. But when you do study monetary policy, and to the extent that I have, and you come to realize the pervasiveness of the implications of the Federal Reserve on the rest of society, you could see this as a major step back in this process of human social evolution that I'm trying to describe here. But within that time, within that past 100 years, we've also had some major steps forward. Just here in America, we had a gay rights movement, a civil rights movement, and a women's rights movement. And I'm not here to advocate for any of the ways that those have been enshrined in government, but those represent major steps forward in our ability to treat every human being with love, faith, and respect, and develop freedom not as simply as something to covet for ourselves, but a way of relating to other people, of respecting their freedom, of respecting the divine rights that we all share as human beings. But the paradigm is shifting. It's not revolution. It's the love-volution. It's a paradigm shift. The philosophical revolution, as Dr. Paul calls it. The message of liberty has to be a lot more than government is bad, statists are evil, and sheeple are stupid. No, it can't just be about that. And it's not. The message of liberty is of love and empowerment. And we shouldn't be sitting on the sidelines, shaking our heads, because we've realized something that others haven't. We should be right there in the game, taking charge and showing people that there is a better way, that survival and reproduction is better off, the odds are increased in a free society, that freedom is the greatest thing we can do for our own security, because it is the greatest thing that we can do to provide for our own prosperity. And anybody who's studied Austrian economics, who understands the free market, the basic concept that when two humans interact freely in a free exchange, is because they feel that they both benefit. This is the foundation of capitalism. And when you take that away, when you introduce violence into the equation, inevitably that possible ideal, that potential of dealing with each other, of interacting for mutual benefit at all times, is compromised. We are falling short of our possibilities every single day simply because we accept force and violence in society. And that is subtracted from what we are capable of technologically, what we are capable of in prosperity and producing a quality of life for ourselves and for our children and creating a better world for the generations to come. But maybe it's futile. Maybe if you take this view, maybe if you share this idea that I've embraced, if you share this way of looking at human history, it's easy to say, well, then it doesn't matter what we do. Maybe it's all futile. As activists, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the next generation is going to be libertarian anyways because they have the tools in front of them and the logic and the reason and the ability to do things that we never could. Now I have to talk about it like kids these days because I'm 30. Damn it. Technology. Empowerment. These are essential to liberty, to embracing this message. When you can't feed your family, morals don't matter, laws don't matter, rules don't matter, freedom doesn't matter. But how are you going to convince people that the welfare state is necessary when we get to the point, and remember, technological improvement is exponential. When we get to the point, and we're getting there very quickly now, when a normal American can work for 1 year and retire and have enough to provide for their family for the rest of their lives. That's an exciting possibility, isn't it? That's what we're coming to. You look at unemployment today, it's not because we don't know what to do with ourselves. Not because we don't know how to apply specialization of labor. We don't know how to put this excess capital to use, but because we have a government holding us back from realizing that potential. But there's something to be said for the fact that we have such high unemployment. We don't have people starving. I don't mean to downplay the suffering of people that are hurting because of our economic situation. But think about it for a second. If you were in the state of nature 2 million years ago, and, well, as we know, the real statistics, when we see 8.3%, what does that really represent? Anybody? What's current unemployment rate from shadow stats? What's the real unemployment? 25, or we're hearing 25 now, 22 and a half. All right, so think back to the state of nature. When everybody had to work most waking hours to hunt and gather to feed themselves, if 25% of the people were unemployed, you might have 25% of the people starving to death. Today, it's not a question. It's not an issue. Okay, it's an issue. Putting this in the historical perspective. And what I said about smartphones. The difference between having a computer at home and having the internet there. And look at how that body of knowledge has developed. The ability to have that wealth of human information at your fingertips. Now that we have it in our pockets, we have the truth button right there. Imagine what we're going to have in 5 to 10 years. Just look that far out. And imagine how much different society is going to be when you have a contact lens on your eyeball that has more computing power than this, which has more computing power right here than you could put an entire room full of supercomputers just 30, 40 years ago. And you have a contact lens in your eyeball that does facial recognition, that looks everybody's background up, that holds everybody accountable for their actions, that sees the truth, that changes the dynamic of every conversation, because all of a sudden everybody has a perfect memory. Everybody has access to that knowledge. Not just, oh, can I type it in fast enough before this latest statist scam gets shoved down my throat and I'm convinced to support another war with bad propaganda? No, immediately, instantly, the conversation is fundamentally altered. And this is a good thing. And I know it's scary. I know it's exciting, but when you see it this way, it's easy to think maybe what we're doing is futile. Maybe Steve Jobs did more for human liberty than Dr. Ron Paul. Who doesn't want to own themselves? Who doesn't want to be free? Who doesn't want to meet their fellow human beings with the love, faith, and respect that is essential to maintaining a free society? Government is like this vestigial organ of social violence, soon to be amputated and cast aside as the useless, horrid, pus-filled leech that it is. The message of liberty is really simple. And Stefan Molyneux, who you'll get to hear more from later, might come up here and tell you that it's about the sacred non-aggression principle and universally preferable behavior and certain philosophical truths and logic and reason and things like that. But it's not that freaking complicated. Every one of you got the message of liberty in kindergarten. You don't hit. You don't steal. And then in church you might have learned you don't kill. And when you did, it wasn't don't steal unless you're an IRS agent. It wasn't don't hit unless you have a badge and a gun. It wasn't thou shalt not kill unless you're wearing a uniform and Barack Obama tells you to go kill people. Those were moral absolutes, and we have carved out this exception for government, this little area of moral exception, where we have instituted all of the worst of human nature. As I said, the vestigial institution of violence, of our primitive instincts, of our inability to convince each other that there is a better way, to meet each other with logic and reason, as opposed to force and violence. But guess what? You don't have to do anything about it. Government cannot stop this movement. Government cannot stop the inevitable course of humanity because humanity marches on. The development of a free society is our destiny as a species, and it is inevitable. They cannot stop us. So you only get to decide what side you're going to be on. And once you do, once you choose freedom, you know you can't go back to sleep. When you wake up to the reality of what we are as a species and where we are going, you can't help but be compelled to help take us to this next level. So in this state of awareness, with this broader perspective, the question I find myself grappling with, is it time? If you were the beta male in the tribe of 2 million years ago, would you stand up to the alpha and tell him to go read some Rothbard and then go pound sand? Would you tell him to stop being such a tyrant? Would you tell him that he really needs to respect the freedom of others and the rights of others? No, because the tools weren't available. We didn't have it then, but now we do. We are creatures of pragmatism, again, first and foremost. So it comes down to, can we show people a better way? Is humanity ready for the message of liberty? Or perhaps there are too many who are still stuck in the cycles of abuse and violence of the past, who are unable to see reason and logic, who are unable to get past the paradigm of statism, who will go to their graves. There are people alive today who will go to their graves and never get this message, who will never understand freedom, who will never have an opportunity to be a part of what I see as the completion of this phase of human evolution, when we get past treating each other like animals and we start treating all of us universally like human beings. 2 million years ago, the concept of hygiene didn't exist. But now, it's just kind of accepted. And similarly, I'm very confident that 50 years from now, all right, if you want to be pessimistic, maybe 100 years from now, liberty will be the status quo. Not just that, it'll be commonly accepted. To challenge it would be seen as a call back to an archaic time. That the times we are living in today are the end of an era. Similarly, not so far down the road, and for those of us in the millennial generation, we will see within our lifetimes the ideas of statism become as archaic as wooden teeth. It's a very exciting possibility. So should we stand back and wait for the ideas to sell themselves? Or should we stand up, take charge, and lead the Lovolution? And personally, I'm with all of you. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. So listen, without any further ado, I wanted to introduce a man, I can't tell you how much I admire him. You know, I first started doing a show, I do a show, Freedom in Radio. I first started doing it in my car because I had a long commute. I worked as a software executive and I had a long commute and I got tired of listening to audiobooks, so I started talking about thoughts I'd had for many years and ended up publishing it and so on. And then there sort of came a tipping point where I said, you know, this is really becoming much more fun than my day job. And so I talked about it with my wife, and I eventually quit and ended up relying on donations because there's nothing more noble than begging for a living. Hey, Socrates started it and I might as well continue the trend. And I felt, you know, this was a courageous thing to do. I was like, yeah, being courageous. And then I heard of it, then met Adam Kokesh. Now, of course, for those of you who don't know, Adam is...
I have some thoughts I'd like to share that aren't what I normally talk about, that are really behind what I've been thinking. Things that I haven't shared except maybe in private conversations. And I'm a little bit anxious to, for the first time, subject these ideas that I hold very dear to me, that are very essential to my worldview. to the scrutiny of the public and to all of you. And so I'm very grateful to have an audience here for this that I know is embracing this message and is here because they're passionate about what I'm passionate about. And it's so exciting to see that nationally, to look around, we have a movement. We have a freedom movement like never before in human history. We've seen political movements in different countries. We've seen political forces come together and do great things and overturn government.
An ex-Marine, and so when I look at my journey and the things that I sort of had to, quote, sacrifice in order to become a messenger of reason, truth, freedom, evidence, reality, whatever you want to call it, I was very much humbled by the amount of integrity, courage, and sacrifice to go from being a Marine to being an incredibly passionate anti-war activist, an incredibly motivating speaker, an incredibly powerful community organizer. I know the word got a little bit abused recently, but it is a very powerful and noble thing to be doing. And when you see the energy and passion that this man brings to the cause, it truly is, much like his biceps, it is a force of nature. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Adam Kokesh!
Governments and advance humanity, but never before in human history have we had a freedom movement like we have today in America. A movement of people who get this message at a philosophical level, at a moral level, at a spiritual level. And so I want to communicate to you today what that means to me and why I define the freedom movement so inclusively as anybody that wants to see freedom increase in this country or in this world or for humanity. And before I do, I want to take a second to ask, who are we as a movement? And a lot of times we look around and we see this beautiful community of such a diverse group of people, of so many different backgrounds, of different perspectives on liberty, of different professional backgrounds, of different all. Well, thank you all very much for being here, and thanks to the organizers for putting this on. We have some late-breaking news out of Washington, D.C. tonight from the Conservative Political Action Conference. You might have heard of their famous straw poll that is supposedly heralded as the measurement of who the conservative movement is supporting for president. And since Ron Paul won it the last 2 years in a row, it's been declared by many people irrelevant. But with Mitt Romney winning it today, it is now officially irrelevant. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity today, but I have to tell